Matt, well, thank you for joining us. This is not your first time with us at Adapt's Connected Cloud and Data Center program now. I've got a number of questions I'd like to ask you. You presented on a few really interesting topics. The first one is around how you've taken this concept and approach to thinking of human-centered design and applied it in a non-traditional way to data centers and how that's kind of changed the way that you guys are approaching the data center conversation. I'd love to hear your thoughts on exactly what you've done there.
So human-centered design isn't something which you'd naturally think of as a bedfellow for data centers. Traditionally, data centers have always been very, very technically heavy, technical infrastructure projects where you're more worried about reliability, maintaining efficiency, driving down power consumption. And the place of people within that space has always been relegated to one of a nuisance. So it's over the last 10 years we've been working really, really hard to try and engineer people out of the space. But if you look at some of the figures and some of the facts we have around the causes of outages within data centers, there's still a very, very consistent and heavy amount of outages that are actually still caused by human error. So I'm starting to look at it and we're really wondering, are we actually hitting the limits of what we can actually do with automation in the data center spaces? And should we actually be looking back at those facilities and actually trying to work out, are we actually making them hostile for people? So we're expecting people to come in to perform at their very, very best, but we're actually not giving them the best chance of actually doing that by making a space for them, which is not really a good place for people to be in. So what I wanted to really start doing was bring in some principles from other areas, so particularly things like commercial buildings, where we're actually taking a lot of effort and a lot of time to optimize how that space performs for people and improve their functionality. And there are some pretty startling statistics around it. So it's about 26% cognitive increase from people working in a really sort of high-end green building. And the actual performance increases they get, and particularly around crisis response as well. There was a really sort of sharp peak in people's ability to respond to crisis when you're in a high-performing building. So while there is no direct map across from a commercial building to a data center, some of the things that we actually have in there are some fairly simple ways to try and help people improve what they're actually doing. So what I really want to start to do is to look at the different roles we have in a data center, start to actually bring a human-centric design approach to it and actually understand where are the pain points that those people are going through every day, and to really sort of step back and go, okay, well these are things that we can fix. They're not expensive, they don't affect the critical infrastructure, they're not going to cause us to take the data center down or change any of the major elements of what we're actually doing, but they might actually help us to reduce that error rate from people's involvement. So let's boost them. Let's give them the best chance they can to be optimal performing people, and let's welcome them back into the data center and actually make that space somewhere they can actually be, somewhere they can work, and somewhere they can actually get a really good shot at doing their job well.
And there's a learning curve involved in that, right? This is how far along the journey are you? How long have you guys spent, understanding the people, building these personas, and kind of moving and kind of thinking about how you can evolve these environments for them?
It's so what we basically do is we start off and we try and build as many different personas as we can around the different roles that we're aware of. So yesterday I talked about a couple of UPS techs, which is just again one very small subset of the people that come in and out of a data center every day. We started looking at things like the FMs as well, particularly, and the people that are spending the most time in there and the ones that are going to benefit the most. So they're the ones that we start with. And then from that point onwards, we'll progress on to interviews and actually start talking to the FMs and seeing whether the personas that we build up around this, from that human-centric design approach, whether they're actually realistic and whether they're real, and the things that we're actually coming up with are representative of what's actually happening in a typical tech's day, for example. Yeah,
excellent. And it's exciting to see. I mean, you mentioned in the building side of things, there's 20% increase in cognitive. Like, it'd be an interesting transition or translation to how it goes in the data center as well. And have you started to see those results as of yet, or is this still early days?
No, this is still very early days. So we've been doing human-centric design in the built environment space for a few years now. Yep. Starting to transition how we actually look at it for a number of different problems, but it's always been a solution that is very, very sort of people-focused. So it works really well for things like transport hubs, where you've got a lot of people coming in and out of space and you're trying to understand how they use it. Yep. It works very well for things like commercial buildings. Yep. And again, where they're really sort of typically human-heavy places. And it's taken me a few years to really sort of work through this and to actually start to realize that it's still applicable to a data center, even though it's still so technically heavy. There's still a place for people to be in there. And if we can really sort of get our heads around this and improve things, then hopefully we can make an impact on how that data center actually responds as well.
Fantastic. Another question, it's the energy efficiency challenge, I should say, because it is a huge challenge for the industry. And there was a few really interesting points that have come up over the past kind of 2 days around energy efficiency not just being this sole financial, it's no longer a decision that we do to drive down costs, or it's moved far beyond that. There's an ethical aspect to it, there's a moral aspect to it. I'm really keen to get your thoughts and kind of some of the work you're doing in this space, from that perspective.
So one of the things I've been really impressed by over the last couple of days, especially hearing a lot of the data center leads on there, is they're actually starting to talk about things more than just purely the financial. They really are taking that moral imperative on board to try and improve things. And I think as data centers grow, and we're starting to see the size and scale of all of these facilities, they're becoming massive industrial users of power. And a lot of them are actually embedded deeply into sort of typical residential neighborhoods, commercial areas, and they're in places where they can actually impact people's lives quite substantially. So the moral imperative here is really to step back, look at how we're actually impacting the people around us again. So it comes back to people, always comes back to people on these things, and actually take some leadership on this one as well. One thing that I think if we don't take that leadership ourselves, then it's the kind of thing that ends up getting imposed on us. And when it typically gets imposed on us, it doesn't happen well. Government steps in, it doesn't do the best job on things, it tries to understand as well as it can, but they'll never understand as deeply as we can from those of us that are in the industry. So if we start to drive things, pick up that moral imperative that we want to actually make things better, we want to reduce power consumption, we want to improve efficiency, then we can actually start to drive some of those things home. And we've seen it before. When the Green Grid was formed, we had a massive industry shift around efficiency and the PUEs of facilities, and we put a lot of focus on things. And it's good to see that starting to come back into the overall energy question again as well now. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that shifts over the next couple of years, and whether we can really start to have an impact on the energy usage of our industry as a whole.
Are you finding that government are starting to lean more and more on the subject matter experts in this space, because it is a larger challenge, and often governments, they tend to be barriers in many of these kind of situations. Are you finding those walls being broken down, and you're starting to have those conversations more and more?
I think government are just starting to get involved in things now. I think they're being very tentative around this space at the moment, which is good, because it basically gives us a chance as an industry to actually step back and actually start to do something ourselves first. If government start to make a few stirrings that they're considering issues and problems around this, then it raises awareness of it at the higher levels of government, so we can start to get a little bit more support around it, which is great. But it also allows us to actually step back and take our own destiny in our hands again, and to actually start to change things ourselves before we have some kind of a heavy-handed approach on there, which will maybe not be the best solution or outcome for us as an industry. Sure,
absolutely. 2 words. I'm not going to frame this question. I'm not going to ask it massively. I just want to get your thoughts on power availability. It's a huge challenge for the industry, for everyone. We've seen it globally, locally. What are your thoughts on just the power availability and what it means to this ecosystem and this community?
It's the biggest challenge I think we're going to have over the next 2 years is going to be around availability of power to facilities. It's not appearing on too many people's radars yet, and we were looking at some of the information that was coming through from the analysts, particularly around what everybody's challenges are and what they think are going to be their big issues. I think they're actually missing out here on the fact that power availability, particularly for those that are actually building new facilities, is going to be a massive issue for us. I'm down in Sydney at the moment, and we're starting to see some huge issues there around availability of power and infrastructure. And as these facilities are getting bigger and bigger, every time we do a job, it increases by another massive scale. I mean, we're up at sort of 100, 150 megawatt facilities now, whereas 2 or 3 years ago, we were still talking about 10, 15 megawatts. So the scale of increase and the size of the facilities that we're building is just increasing exponentially. And the demands that's actually placing onto our authorities and our supply authorities to actually provide that power into the neighbourhoods and the locations that we're after, it's going to be a real challenge.
Yeah, and are the warning lights going off? Are people aware that this is going to lead to potential mass-scale outages that shut down systems that are critical systems as well? Like, these are not soft things to talk about. How do we approach that before it's to the point where we can't actually deal with some of these challenges?
So I think the big issue is that there's still a massive discussion to be had on a national level, particularly around how we deal with power and all the energy markets and things as well. But I think as an industry, data centers being such major users and industrial level users of power, I think we actually should have a voice at the table when we start talking about this. We're going to be increasingly large users of power. I think there was some figures, I think, from Greenpeace a couple of years ago that basically said that we were using about 10 to 13% of all global power produced as an industry, which is absolutely huge. And as I say, we're looking at hyperscale here. We're looking at all of the big international players, all of the cloud providers. They're all growing massively. They're growing rapidly. So that figure is just only going to increase. So power for the data center industry is going to become a massive problem at some point soon. And I think as an industry, we need to grab hold of that, and we need to get engaging and actually start talking to government about how we actually deal with this, and actually be proactive and on the front foot with them and start talking and shaping how that forward path goes.